The following program was funded through a grant from the Springfield Cable Endowment.
Springfield consists of two worlds, that of the living and the dead. Entities roam our world of the living. Ghosts which dwell in our homes and in our souls. Spirits which have been seen and heard. Ghosts are everywhere, and according to Springfield's community, Springfield is no exception. Springfield is alive with the dead. If you think you should be afraid, you're wrong. Because ghosts and the spiritual world are nothing to be frightened of. In fact, the only difference that separates us from ghosts is that physically, they're dead. Beyond that, ghosts are just people like you and I. This is the belief of the First Spiritualist Church, a sect which practices spiritual communication and healing in Springfield, Massachusetts. Join them as they explore the amazing spiritual dimension of Springfield.
A ghost is, in effect, a being, just like an individual, who no longer has the physical body. They are an entity, a spiritual being, that is around and about us. I mean, they're not up there, down there. They are in the same vibration, the same world we are in a different vibration. This ghost or entity usually is back because they have unfinished business, or there is something with the person or persons they're dealing with that they would like to resolve.
John Sullivan is a carpenter who believes in ghosts. Usually, during the week, you can find him restoring antiques for his Worthington workshop. On Sundays, however, he puts down his hammer and saw and communicates with those who have passed on to the other realm of existence, the spiritual realm. Sullivan has been the minister of Springfield's First Spiritualist Church since 1987. As a spiritualist, he believes in the New Testament principle that we as people are of two bodies, one physical and one spiritual.
Spiritualism is a philosophy, a science, and a religion based on the continuity of life. In other words, base all of us on the fact that we have communication from the spirit world. And the communication is loving, caring, and sharing. And the energy is helpful as we go about our own mundane lives to work towards a spiritual end.
Spiritualists abide by a declaration of 9 principles. Included in these principles is their belief in infinite intelligence, as well as their belief in spiritual healing and spiritual communication. These two beliefs are both areas of focus during the Spiritualist service, which takes place here at the First Spiritualist Church on Bliss Street. The Spiritualist Ceremony is probably the least ceremonious of all religions. It typically begins with a few hymns, and then it's down to business. Celebrated first is the spiritual healing, otherwise known as laying of the hands.
We do a healing service. And the healing service is what I call one of my favorite parts, which allows each and every individual to come in tune with whatever problems they have. Laying on of hands allows the instrument, the healer, to work with various people within the congregation, and by laying their hands upon their shoulders, head or neck in that fashion, allows the energy coming from the spirit world through doctors who have now passed the spirit, through various guides and teachers, to those who are afflicted. As the healer develops the healing ability, they will find certain chemical changes take place within their body. I know in my own way, I have in fact developed what I call a little vibration within the hands. And as my hands are placed on the person, the intensity of vibration will vary depending on what they need and what the spirit guides and doctors believe should be sent to them.
Healing may also take place where and the afflicted are miles apart. This act is referred to as absent healing.
Absent healing is no more than you're sitting in a meditation of some sort, possibly listening to some music of your choice, and sending loving, caring thoughts to another individual who may be in some way afflicted with a disease, emotional, mental, or physical. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And your interest in helping regain whatever they're looking for as far as the fullness of body, mind, and spirit.
After the healing, the most pinnacle part of the spiritualist service takes place, the mediumship.
That point becomes, in effect, when the medium, and this is the person we deal with. Now, the medium is an individual whose physical vibration is attuned to that spiritual world. In other words, basically, they raise their vibration, where spirit lowers theirs to some degree, so that the communication can take place on a physical level. At that time, the communication takes place between the medium and the person in the congregation. And finally, I do my mediumship mainly by what we call clairsentience. I don't really sense or feel, it just happens. In other words, when you get the message, that's when I hear the message. And this way it takes what I call the me out of the mediumship and allows, in fact, the person getting the message not to be interrupted with my being involved in the mediumship. As he comes into you, and I leave you the spirit cannot direct you. Spirit cannot change. You make your decisions, spirit will help you. Anyone can heal. Anyone can become a medium of one form or another. So there's no limit. We're not limiting to certain people.
Circle groups are offered to spiritualists so they may strengthen their spiritual healing and abilities. The group meets a few nights a week in the church basement. They begin with a discussion and then progress into spiritual healing.
I don't put a lot of thought into it. I put my trust in my guides. I'll stand behind the person, put my hands on their shoulders, try to give them energy, ask for the highest and best, and to give them what they need.
It's important before doing healing to center down. As a healing channel, you're acting as a link between spirit and the person who's sitting in your chair. So as focused as you are is as focused as the healing is going to be. When you're connecting up with your spirit guides, to be centered allows their energy to flow through you into the other person. It's not your own energy that you're using, because that would be draining your life force.
You can feel the energy, the calm energy coming down. You feel your hands getting warm or hot or whatever. And when your spirit guides come close, you can feel them. Like it's like somebody's standing next to you, but you know there's no person there, but you can sense the presence.
My main concern, my main object of going to this church has been the healing aspect of it. It's really been a fascinating adventure for me. I've had some medical problems that were supposedly progressive that for all intents and purposes disappeared. I've been able to help a lot of friends and family in doing the healing.
Similar to the church service, laying of the hands is followed by spiritual communication. Before the mediumship begins, the lights are turned off, permitting the mediums in the group to concentrate without any visual distractions. When a spiritual transmission is made, the medium calls on the person for whom the message is for. The medium then describes the spirit's physical appearance and the relationship the spirit might have had with the person. They then convey any message the spirit may want to express.
That at this point in your life, you're trying to put a stop to something on a material level and also personal.
You calm your mind and you release all thoughts, and then all of a sudden the spirit will come in and you can see them perfectly clear and you can describe them, and then you can hear them talking and the hearing telepathy.
Spirit works with the subconscious, so you have to be really careful with figuring out whether that's a suggestion that's been put there for you to receive, or whether it's just something that's coughed up as kind of like stuff that happens when you fall asleep. It's either really vivid, the colors are extremely bright, beyond what I would normally, when somebody says picture a rose, it would be more vivid than I would picture. Or if I'm going to see spirit, I often have a very, very shadowy gray outline, which nevertheless has definable features and colors.
Sometimes I see symbols. I'll see, you know, a book open to a certain page, or I don't know. Sometimes if a person's having a health problem, you'll see like what they should be eating or some herb they should take. Sometimes I see people, which is very interesting, and that's what I like. But it's not scary. It's almost like when you dream, you see people and you're not afraid of them. People come into your head and you see them and they tell you things.
Sometimes I see things almost as though you see a memory. It's not like I see that, not like I see you sitting here. It's like like you remember a dream.
I get a comfortable feeling, and I get these visions or these sounds, small images. Some are images, some look like movies that go on, and sometimes I'll see a person standing right beside, outside of someone standing beside, like you, for instance.
You see one now?
There's a small gentleman, he feels very much like a grandfather to you, but he was very short. He's standing on, it's almost as though you should be able to feel him over your left shoulder. Oh, really? But he's standing there just watching over you, and he feels like he's a grandfather.
You always get, you know, your favorite grandma in to tell you what a great life you're having. You get, you know, Aunt Joan that you had trouble with, and this is a way of working this out.
What separates spiritualism from other religions is how people originally become involved. Most are not born into spiritualism, but actually discover it for themselves. This is usual to a spiritual encounter that they themselves experienced, but could not explain. Such an experience was why John Sullivan looked into spiritualism. He had questions about his own encounter. Sullivan's saga into spiritualism began in this house in East Bridgewater, Massachusetts, over 25 years ago. One night, while getting ready for Sullivan was suddenly disturbed by his daughter screaming.
What's wrong? I ran into a room and she pointed to another doorway. I ran back into the hall, ran for the stairs, and saw footsteps in the carpet all the way up the stairs. Was I expecting that? Absolutely not. What was I expecting? I have no idea.
When Sullivan bought the house, he was told that the previous owner of the property had committed suicide by drowning herself in the back pool. What he wasn't told, however, was that she was still lurking about the property.
I was now dealing with something different. I was dealing with the fact that this woman didn't go to hell. She still was in the house, and she was interested in finding out, I guess, why she was still alive. Seeing the footsteps in the carpet changed an awful lot for me.
Alarmed by what he had seen, Sullivan visited his local priest to talk to him about his experience. The feedback Sullivan was not what he expected.
Basically, the gentleman insinuated that I might have been on drugs, I might have had some drink, and I explained to him I didn't drink, and I certainly didn't do drugs.
When Sullivan couldn't turn to his own faith, he researched the spiritual phenomena on his own. He read books and attended classes and workshops. Curiosity turned into pure interest and belief. This search into spiritualism has answered many questions for Sullivan, in reason why the ghost in East Bridgewater revealed itself to his daughter.
What we were seeing was the fact that my daughter, who was now going through puberty, whose own psyche was heightened at that point, was able to perceive this woman in pictures, which I couldn't do at that particular time.
Mediums often feel that they must use the power they've developed to help others. Stephen Hermann has been a certified spiritual medium and healer for over a decade. During this time, he has communicated with thousands from beyond the grave. Today, he meets with Sharon Sandrowski, a sales coordinator from Chicopee.
Now, what happens in a reading with Sharon or anyone else, if I were giving them a reading, is that person's loved ones, as well as guides who are working with them, will come through and bring information that the individual, Sharon or whoever it is, needs to hear. when I receive things clairvoyantly, which is seen. So I'll see things visually, and they can, sometimes they're very faint, but usually they're very vivid. It's almost like 3D, so you can see around. They have a certain type of texture and a certain type of vitality of their own.
Well, he said that there were 2 spirits that he was picking up on that were the strongest. I got the impression that there were others there, but they weren't as strong as these 2. One was a man and one was a woman. And the description that he was giving at first of the man, I thought was my grandfather, who had 20 years ago. But then as he continued to describe the personality, I felt much stronger that it was my companion's father who passed away a few months ago. And also the woman, I have a feeling, the way he was describing her, it definitely sounded like my grandmother. She was similar in a lot of ways to me, or so I was told by family members. And for him to say that, a little bit of a mind blower, because he didn't know who I was or anything about me aside from my first name, and that was it.
After I finish a reading, I also feel really high. I feel extremely filled up with energy and charged up. And the reason is because when you're working with a higher spiritual, faster rate of energy, you're in this presence of this greater power, and it actually, you receive a healing, and you feel completely fired up.
I was very happy that I did this, because I feel that he definitely knew what he was doing. And like I said, there were just a lot of things that he said that were happening in my life, have happened in my life, and it really wasn't anything like a prediction type of thing. It's just guidance from the spirit world. That's all it is.
Spiritual guidance is always the desired outcome during a reading. And even though it's not guaranteed to happen, it usually does. But the medium's work doesn't stop there. Often, a medium is asked to visit a certain location where the spiritual energy is present. Springfield's George Walter Vincent Smith Museum is filled with beauty, history, and mystery. It was named after the eccentric millionaire from New York who built it nearly a century ago. Before the turn of the century, George Walter Vincent Smith and his wife Belle Townsley Smith traveled the world collecting antiques and art from everywhere they visited. After amassing so many treasures, Smith decided to build a museum so the public could enjoy his eclectic collection. It eventually became his greatest passion.
Walter Vincent Smith and his wife Belle Townsley Smith elected not to have children. And from the start of their marriage, they made a secret pact that became known later on, that they would devote their entire life together to the creation of the museum. Even a week before his death, at the age of 91, in 1923, with difficulty, he would walk those steps from his home to the museum and back again to be sure everything was.
After his death, Smith was cremated and his ashes were placed behind this wall in the museum's rug room. The cremated remains of his wife would join his 7 years later. Since Smith's death, strange and unexplainable events have taken place inside the museum. Nothing unusual occurs when the museum is open to the public. But when it's closed, museum personnel never know what to expect. On numerous occasions, the Steinway piano has been said to play beautiful melodies without anyone at the keys. While alone in the museum, one security officer was startled when he heard all the toilets in the building flush simultaneously. Over the course of a year, a custodian complained about entering the rug room early in the morning and finding one of the screws which supported the Smith's memorial plaque missing. And perhaps the most bizarre event took place in the sculpture court. While making his rounds, a security officer was in the sculpture room and then froze in astonishment when he caught sight of a large triangle hovering in mid-air for almost a full minute. Could these incidents be explained by science? Or does the truth lie within the spiritual dimension? Could George Walter Vincent Smith and his wife Belle be responsible for these mischievous events? Reverend John Sullivan was asked to find out. Having no knowledge of the museum's history or its founders, Sullivan started his investigation. He was accompanied by the museum's publicist, Sarah Orr.
It's interesting because you can feel a lot of the energy as you watch me. I'm picking up an awful lot from the past. You watch my arms, the hair starts to bristle. And also you start to get the feeling of the energy that flows. The energy's flowing not from a sick person, but from all the collection of people who have touched this in the past. I feel as I'm talking to you, I'm being drawn into the other room for whatever reason. Although this holds my interest, it seems I'm going into an area that was of interest to another. I have a gentleman who's in here that I can feel his presence. And as I feel the presence, I have a gentleman here who's probably around 5'7" in the build. Was a little thick, old. His hair would have been pretty well missing. What he had may have been a little white around the edges. And I feel his presence here. I also feel the presence of a woman. And again, connected with, I'm not sure, the museum or something special here. She was on the shorter side. Her hair would have gone into the white. Her glasses would have been ones with the wire rim on them. And I feel that they're both just pleasantly looking at everything that I see within the room, as if to just nod their head in accordance with, this is nice, this is a nice layout, or whatever they're feeling. I feel very positive with the two people there.
It sounds like you're talking about George and Belle. That's George Walter Vincent Smith and his wife, Belle Townsley Smith, who collected all the material, all the objects in the building, and contributed them to the city. So this is their museum. George was supposedly small of stature. We haven't been able to confirm how tall he really was, but the word of mouth was that, and some found was that he was small.
I will say they're very much around here, and if you can look at my arms and pick up the energy as they're starting to bristle, they're very much a part of this. This is the place where the ashes are of the couple we spoke about. What I found as we went through the room in which their ashes are placed, they wanted to make sure that everyone knew they weren't there. They were, in fact, alive and well in the spirit world, and as we saw by my description, that they are very much alive and aware of their surroundings here in the museum. They're here because they cared for the museum. They enjoyed the artwork. They enjoyed the things they collected over a period of time. And consequently, they just, or I should say, I'd like to have everyone know that this is a lovely place to be. It's an interesting place to visit. And as far as the spirits are concerned, they're very, very happy just sharing what they had with others around them.
Jenny Harris was a grandmother and mother to be cherished. She was sweet, kind, and always there when someone needed her. When she passed away at the age of 95, she was deeply missed by those she left behind. But Grandma wasn't going to leave so easily. It would take more than death to pull her away from those she loved. She was buried in a Holyoke cemetery away from her family's apartment, making it convenient for the family to visit Grandma, or for Grandma to visit the family. After her passing, a slew of strange, unexplainable events have taken place in her family's apartment.
I have, on more than one occasion, been out hanging laundry or whatever, just being on the porch, watering flowers or whatever, and I could hear people going up and down stairs. But there's nobody there.
Soon after hearing the footsteps on the back stairs, Jennifer caught an odd smell in her apartment, which brought back memories of her grandmother.
I would just walk through it, and it's a very light, it was a light cachet perfume that was very light. You just barely catch it, and the windows were all closed, so it wasn't, you know, somebody from the street or anything like that. That was the first thing I thought of when I could smell it, was that it was something my grandmother had worn.
The next unusual event took place during the night in her infant daughter Melissa's bedroom.
I was woken up by drawers in my daughter's room, just opening and closing, not violently, but it's like they were looking for something. By the time I'd gotten to her room, it stopped.
Jennifer's mother also had her share of strange activity in her upstairs apartment. Late one evening, Betty Bouchette walked into her kitchen and saw an unusual light formation dance wildly before her eyes. Jennifer was almost that her grandmother was responsible for these strange occurrences. It would take one more incident a few years later to completely convince her. Jennifer's daughter, Melissa, would often have conversations with an imaginary friend she described as her great-grandmother. Knowing the two had never met, Jennifer excused this behavior, thinking it was nothing more than a child's imagination. But all that changed after Melissa asked her a question.
I was just sitting in the kitchen, just writing my groceries. Just came out and said, "Hey, Mommy, who's Bobolink?" And I told her I didn't know. And that was enough, and she went back in her room. And after sitting there for a couple of minutes and actually thinking about it, it had clicked that my grandmother had called my oldest son, Bobolink. The boys had come home, and I'd asked them if they had said anything to her about it. And I had no clue what I was talking about because none of them remembered what my grandmother had called them. And so there was no way she would have known.
Melissa, knowing the name Bobolink, clinched it for Jennifer. She was utterly convinced that her grandmother was dead but not gone. After learning about the First Spiritualist Church from a local newscast, she called them for help.
I take a picture on the exterior with black and white, just for my own benefit, to know the house. And hopefully someday I might see a spirit face or something within that photograph.
Sullivan first asked Jennifer a few questions about the apartment. It didn't take him long to start picking up spiritual vibrations.
When I first started talking to him, he mentioned this lady that her hand shook when she put her makeup on, and she had grayish hair, and she was in her 60s, and he described my sister. Then out of the clear blue sky, he was talking about this gentleman that was so tall and wore this certain kind of cap and had this little bitty mustache.
It was like almost was like a rare would happen. It wasn't.
I said, "Oh my God, he's talking about my father."
You understand? You know who I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
Who was it?
My dad.
So there you have. You've got a family problem here. And I say in a family problem is they're here to help you.
Right.
And they're here to work with you. Noise you feel and everything else, you've got them all here.
The house was indeed haunted, not with just one ghost, but with 6 or 7.
I can't even put it into words. It was just so amazing that he could pick stuff up like that. It was just amazing that he could do it.
Spiritual healing, mediumship, ghosts. Believing such things might seem ludicrous to some, but for spiritualists, it's a rewarding way of life.
It gives me a place to focus my own energies. It gives me to focus my own growth and expectation toward becoming a better person. It gives me a support group.
If you've ever lost someone you really love and you make recontact with them, the feeling is indescribable. For me, it has answered an age-old, the number one question on the planet is what happens after death. And it has answered that question for me.
The preceding program was funded by a grant from the Springfield Cable Endowment.